We're reading the Crossroads Chapter 17. Goat milk squirted out of Jamie's nose when Angela exited the tiny trailer bathroom. Her eyes and lips were covered in black makeup, and her cheeks had gone a pale color instead of her usual bronzed brown. She looked like death, and not in the intriguing undead vampire way. Why do you look like that? Jamie asked. It's for the play. It's called stage makeup. But aren't you a nun? She sent a death glare at him over her blackened eyes. You don't know anything, she said, in English, and then left the trailer without breakfast. Jamie downed the rest of the milk and grabbed a banana along with his backpack and hoodie before dashing after her. ¿Qué pasa? He asked when he caught up with his cousin. Nothing, again in English. I'm not in a bad mood, she groaned and shook her head like she couldn't believe what she had to deal with. She walked faster up the hill, even though they had plenty of time to make it to the bus. Jamie lengthened his stride to keep up with her. Every few steps he turned to look at her, staring to ask another question, and then changed his mind. Each time he looked, her blackened eyes remained focused ahead. Do you want the banana? He offered her his breakfast as a peace offering. No, it's too ripe. At least this time she said it in Spanish. He waved the banana in her face, waiting for her to accept it. You need to eat something. No, what I need is for you to leave me alone. And she was back to English and back to walking faster than necessary. The bus took forever to arrive, and while they waited, Angela did an award-winning performance of ignoring Jamie. Except, had he not been there, he doubted she would have maintained the emo stare at the highway. She also wouldn't have stepped in front of him to deliberately get on the bus first, or flicked her hair over her shoulder and strutted, yes, strutted to the back of the bus, where instead of sitting on the seat with that awful Tristan always saved for her, she wrapped her arms around his neck and plopped down on his lap. Hey, babe, loving the goth look. Tristan draped an arm over her thigh. Jamie stopped watching. Hopefully, Abuela wasn't watching either. You gotta sit on your own seat, the driver shouted as he glared at Angela through his rearview mirror. I ain't moving till you do. Jamie turned just enough to catch Angela slide off Tristan's lap. Redness threatening burst through her pale makeup. He shifted his gaze to the roof of the bus as if he rolled back on the highway. Gracias, Abuela. When he finally turned to say hi to Seth, or to Sean, his friend had a note for him. Your sister is acting really weird. I know, Jamie wanted to write, but didn't know how to translate that he was in full agreement. Instead, he copied Sean's word, yes, really weird. It also would have been hard for him to explain that Angela wasn't his sister, and that for the first time in his life, he was glad she wasn't. Jamie, do you have a minute? Mrs. McAllister called out to him in Spanish as his class finished their music lesson. Oh, you're in trouble, Diego muttered as he knocked into him as he left the room. Jamie rearranged the recorder in his bag, making sure he hadn't scratched it. What was it with teachers and their ability to always want to talk when you least wanted to? He watched the rest of his class leave to return to Mrs.'s room. Carla hung back to wait for him, her head tilted curiously to the side, causing her black hair to fall over her purple glasses. I have to go, he told the music teacher. She glanced at the clock. There's still 45 minutes before the final bell, and I already have told Mrs. Threadworth I wanted to talk to you. How are you doing? Carla tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear and sent Jamie a small smile before following the rest of her class out. Jamie wished he could join her. Maybe ask her a casual question on the way back to class. She liked cats, right? Bien, Jamie sighed. You look distracted today. Jamie shook his head. Now was not the time to talk about Abuela. in Angela, who continued to become more distant with every day, and about Don and his inevitable deportation, about the fact that just like Magwell's murder, he couldn't think of anything to do to help. And above all, he didn't want to talk about his deportation to return home and hoped Diego was wrong about his family not wanting him. I'm fine. Mies didn't let it rest. Have you made some friends? Sort of. Mies gave him that look that said, as a teacher, she expected a better answer and wasn't going to let him go until he complied. Jamie let out a breath. Freddie and Carla are nice, but I like Sean best. Who? Sean. He's on the bus, but not in my class. Mies still pretended she didn't know who he was talking about. Annoyance grew inside Jamie. He knew Mies knew everyone in the school, from the littlest kindergartners to the burly eighth graders who looked old enough to vote. She just wanted to keep him talking, and he was not in the mood. Sean, he said quickly, blonde hair and freckles, red dots. Sean. He flopped his arms to his side to emphasize how tired he was of her stupid game. Oh, you mean Sean? Jamie's shoulders slumped as his annoyance grew. He said his name, Sean. Yes, he said that. Well, no, he wrote it. Like he wrote the text for The Adventures of Sim. Like he and Jamie always wrote things to each other. Suddenly, Jamie wondered if this boy had been playing a joke on him. Was their whole friendship just some stupid game to see how gullible he was? Jamie could see Angela's friend Tristan playing a trick like this. But Sean, who always waved and saved him a seat, but never pestered him with questions when he wanted to be left alone, Jamie couldn't believe it. Didn't want to believe it. Jamie hid his head in his hands. No wonder Jamie never saw him in school. His cover would have been blown. But why would he do such a thing? I hate him, and I hate it here. Jamie? Mies kept her hand on his shoulder when he tried to shake it off. Sean is an Irish name. It's pronounced Sean. But in this case, it's spelled Sean, which is pretty normal. Have you heard of the actor Sean Connery? James Bond, Jamie replied without thinking about it. Exactly. Mies smiled kindly. Your friend and the actor have the same name. So why didn't Sean, correct me? But Jamie answered the question for himself as soon as he asked it, because he never spoke to Sean, and Sean never spoke back. Maybe Jamie said hi and a few other words, but besides that, they never talked. That was one of the things Jamie liked about Sean. They understood each other without speaking. Sean is, Mies paused as she tried to remember her Spanish. I don't know the word. In English, it's deaf. Deaf? As in dead? He clutched his school bag to his side. She couldn't mean he was a killer. Then that he was dead? What happened? Sean was alive this morning. Mies waved her arms to calm Jamie down. Oh no, different word. This one means he can't hear. His ears don't work. He hears nothing. Nothing? And he can't talk? He makes sounds sometimes and laughs, but it's hard to learn words when you can't hear. He talks with his hands and has a special hearing teacher who helps him learn to communicate like that. It all made sense now. Jamie could see Sean in his mind making gestures with his hands and had never given them a second thought. Most of his family used their hands in addition to verbal communication, and more passionate the topic, the bigger the gestures. He never thought Sean's signs were actual words. He planted himself on a chair in front of Mrs.'s desk, strewn with instrument parts and sheet music. Show me. I only know very basic sign language and how to spell my name. Mies glanced at the clock. Jamie followed her gaze. Music class had finished 10 minutes ago, and now there were only 35 minutes left until the final bell. Mies might wonder where he was, or she might be glad for once she didn't have to re-explain or over-explain things. Por favor, Mies, Jamie pleaded. She bit her lip, and Jamie could almost see her mind debating the situation. She had work to do, and Mises would get very upset she had been keeping him so long. On the other hand, poor Jamie, all alone from a different country, unable to speak the grueling English language, finally made a friend. Jamie noticed her weakening on and went on. On Fridays, after music, Mrs. lets us have a free period to read or start homework as long as we're quiet. I'm not missing anything. Good. I do think learning different ways of communicating is a good thing. She sighed before motioning him to the other side of her desk to view her computer. Let's look it up on YouTube. Mies accidentally loaded a British Sign Language video instead, and after a few seconds of her saying, "That's not what I learned," she figured out her mistake. Apparently, different countries had different signs for the same letters. Weird. Even among deaf communities, someone from one country wouldn't be able to understand someone from a different country. It didn't seem right. But at the same time, who should decide that their country's signs were the correct ones? The same is with the spoken languages. One wasn't better than the other. They watched the American Sign Language alphabet video 3 times before Jamie remembered all the letters. He had to think before each one, but after that, the 3rd time, he could spell his name using his hand, and Angela and Tomas, because it was basic American Sign Language video and it didn't show how to add accents to letters. But a lot of people didn't write Spanish names with accents, so maybe it just didn't really matter. Then they watched the video that showed them how to say basic signs like hi, simple wave. My name is, placing a hand on the chest for my and tapping the pointer and the middle finger of each hand against each word to create an X while palms faced your chest for the word name. Thank you. Tapping your chin with fingertips and then extending the palm out. And a few others. Jamie, you have to go. He stopped the video and closed the browser. The bell will ring in a minute. He couldn't miss the bus, but for the first time ever, he didn't want to leave school. Not with so much left to learn. Can we do this again on Monday? Mies laughed. I'm the music teacher. I have my own classes to teach. But I'll ask Mrs. Threadworth and Mr. Mike, Sean's teacher, and maybe they can arrange something. Cool, he said in English, just as the bell rang. He tapped his chin with his fingertips before bringing his palm out in front of him, in thanks. Mies waved by in return. He wove his way as quickly as he could through the herd of kids and bulging backpacks to his class. Mies stood on the toes of her leather granny shoes, cleaning the whiteboard, when Jamie returned to the classroom. Jamie, where have you been? Is everything all right? She asked. I'm perfect, he said in English, as he gathered his hoodie and his lunch bag before holding out his hand the way she liked. Bye, Mises. She blinked behind her glasses before shaking his hand. Goodbye, Jamie. Then he dashed out of the room like Vida after a rabbit. The driver of bus 36 gave him a "You're late" look and closed the door behind him. Jamie dropped onto the seat next to Sean as he caught his breath. He shoved his stuff under the seat in front and turned to his friend, who held his head to an angle as if to ask what happened. Hi, Sean, except Jamie said it with a wave and finger spelling Sean. Sean's eyes widened and his mouth opened into a grin so huge he could have been an anime character. A second later, Sean's right hand flashed in a series of signs. This time, Jamie's eyes widened and mouth dropped. Too fast, too new. His brain raced as he tried to figure out what Sean had said. No clue. Sean's smile turned into a kind of understanding, one as he repeated his spelling signs, slow enough for a turtle to get it. Hola, Jamie. Jamie's mouth dropped, turned to a smile. His friend spoke Spanish, or at least he knew how to spell hola correctly. Jamie dug into his backpack for his sketchbook and drew the two of them, Sean with blonde hair and lots of freckles, and himself with black hair and no freckles. Underneath he wrote amigos, because friends was too hard to spell. Sean pointed to the word and then linked his pointer finger on one on top of the other, and then switched finger was on top to do it again. Then he pointed to Jamie before tapping his own chest and did a finger linking sign again. Jamie nodded and repeated Sean's sign. Yes, we're friends. With nothing left to say, Sean eagerly tapped the back of his sketchbook. Maybe it was time to introduce a new character to the adventures of Sim.